Okay, so let's get started with testing. Now, we talked about testing briefly way back at the beginning of this course, and you may have been saying to yourself, well, wait a second, he said testing was important, but he's not doing any. Well, I wanted to get enough code in there that we could actually test things without having to go back and change it over and over and over. And we're going to write tests now, and we'll continue to write them for the remainder of this course. Now, the first thing I want to test is my main function. And if you recall, I said back in the beginning when I was going over testing in the introduction to Go, that my goal would be to not test my main function, to make it as stupid as I possibly could, and instead test things outside of the main function and just leave the main function alone. So we can do that, and we can do it pretty easily. And we can do it by creating a new function here on my main.go, and I'm just going to call it run. Func run. And it's going to take no parameters, but it's going to return an error, or nil if there is no error. So at the end, I can say return nil, because I'm going to have to do that at some point. And what I'm going to do is take everything from here, from where I initialize my renders and reinitialize my handlers, all the way up to the beginning and cut it out of there. And I'm going to just say run. Well, actually, I'll say error is equal to run. And I'll check for the error in a moment. Then I'll paste what I cut out of my main function into my run function. And it should catch up. And what I'm going to do here is say if error is not equal to nil, in other words, if the setup failed, then I want to return, I want a log.fatal. I just want to stop and print out the error. Okay, so log.fatal will write to our terminal, and it will stop the application. It won't go any further. And that's exactly what I want. So let's go down here and see, are we actually getting any errors? Because we have to. Well, we register a gob. That doesn't throw errors. We initialize our app.inProduction. That's fine. This is all fine. None of this throws errors. Aha, here's one where we create our template cache. Well, if that gets set to non-nil, in other words, if that throws an error, I can just return the error right here. Return error. And that won't bother trying to do anything else. So there. Now, this is testable. Almost. There's still some more work to do. So let's write a test for this. Let's try to write a test for this. So I'll come in here to my main folder and create a new file, a new Go file, which I will call main_test.go. And as you recall, anything that has _test before the .go, that's considered to be a test file. Okay? So what am I going to do inside my main test? Well, what I want to do, if you think about it, is just func test run. I want to test that run function that exists over in my main.go file. This one right here. So let's write a test for that or see if we can. And of course, because it's the test, it takes a pointer to testing.t. And it automatically imported testing for me. That's good. So let's just say error is assigned run. Does that work? Well, let's find out. If error is not equal to nil, then what do? T.error f failed, not just T.error, failed run. And let's try running it. Now, I'm going to do all of my testing, all of the running of the tests in a terminal window. You can do it in the terminal in your IDE if you want to, but I'm actually going to do it here. So let me run that test. Am I in the right folder? Oh, I am in the root level, so I need to go to Command Web and go test. And it passed. Perfect. No problem. And if I go test-v, just to get the verbose, it runs test run, and it passed it. Okay, so that was easy. Now I know how to test my main.test. How do I test, for example, middleware? Here I have nosurf, and here I have session load. Is there a way of testing the middleware? Well, we can try. Let's just create a new test file. Middleware_test.go. Okay. And let's see what we have to test. We have to test nosurf, and we have to test session load. Well, can I call those? Let's try that. Let's see if we can. Func test nosurf. T pointer to testing.t. And let's see what we can do. Well, I could try saying H, what does it return? Let's see what it returns. It returns an HTTP handler. Okay, can I just go H for my handler is assigned nosurf, and nosurf has to take a parameter. And it takes a next HTTP handler. Well, where am I going to get one of those? I need to create a handler to pass to nosurf so it can hand me back a handler. Well, I need to create one of those. Fortunately, it's not that difficult to do it. What I need to do is to take advantage of Go's interfaces, like we talked about way back in the introduction to the Go language. So I'm going to need some method of setting up the environment before this actual test runs. And that's not that hard. So let's go to our web folder and create a file with a very specific name, setup_test.go. And whatever's in here will actually run before our tests run. It won't run in our compiled program. It's not part of that, but it will run before our tests run. So in this file, I need to set certain things up. So what I need to do first of all is anytime you have a setup test, setup_test.go, it has to have a function. And that function has to be called test main. So func test main, and m is just my variable name, and it's of type testing, not t, but m. And it doesn't return anything, but it runs. It does certain things. So what it does here is we can set up our variables in there if we wanted to. And I'm going to put os.exit. But before it exits, that's supposed to be exit. Exit, that just says stop. But before it does that, it's going to run certain things. m.run. It's going to run my tests. So this says, before you start running the tests, so middleware test or main test, do something inside this function, then run the tests, then exit. And it also gives me a place to store variables that I might need outside of the test main function. And here's where I'm going to create an object that satisfies the HTTP handler interface. And it's going to be a type. And the type will be my handler. That's just the name that I choose. And it's just a struct. So that's the type. Now I need to satisfy the satisfy the HTTP.handler interface. Well, the HTTP.handler interface, we can go look at it here under middleware and find an HTTP handler, and there it is. And it tells you all about it here right now. And all we need to do is to implement the same methods or the same functions that it does. And in this case, that's really easy. So let's go back to setup test and do precisely that. So I'll create a function. It will be tied to my handler, my handler. So I'll put mh, my variable name, in the receiver, and it's just a pointer to my handler. Okay? And now I need to have the function with exactly the same names as the ones that are implemented by HTTP handler. So what does it have? It has one called serve HTTP, which we've used in our main function, I believe. And it takes two arguments, a w, which is an HTTP.responseWriter, and a pointer to, I got to give it a variable name, r, a pointer to HTTP.request. And I'm not going to return anything. I've implemented it. That's all I have to do. So now I've created this type. So what can I do with that type? Well, I can go back to my middleware test, which is over here, and I can actually now populate this with the information that it needs to have. nosurf requires, if I point at it, it requires an HTTP handler. So all I have to do is create a variable that satisfies the interface for HTTP handler. And I can just go var myh, which is just a variable name that I'm picking, and it's of type myHandler, which I defined over in setup_test.go right here. So now that I've done that, I can pass that as an argument, myh. Now, so myh, let's see here, what did I miss? Type does not implement HTTP handler as serve HTTP method has a pointer receiver. What did I do wrong? Well, in here, I need to make this a pointer. Now it's a pointer to that variable. So that works. So now I satisfy the requirements for nosurf. And I've received an HTTP handler back here, but I haven't done anything with it. How do I test that it's actually a handler? That's really the only thing I need to test at this point for our purposes. When I call nosurf, it should receive an HTTP handler or something that satisfies that interface, and it should return something that is also an HTTP handler. So all I can do is just test for it. And we can test for that very easily. We can use our switch statement, which we saw a long time ago, and I'll just use v as my variable name, and that will be assigned the type of h. So I've now got a switch statement. I'm storing in V whatever type H is. And as it's a switch statement, it has to have these parentheses. And I'll put case HTTP.handler. If the type is an HTTP handler, do nothing. So I'll just put a comment here, do nothing. This is what we expect. So if it gets that, this should be a colon, not a semicolon. If it gets that, we've in effect passed our test. Otherwise, the default is going to be something as simple as writing an error, t.error, and we'll write our error. Type is, and in this case, I'm going to type is not HTTP.handler. And then that fails. So we should be able to run this test now. Let's go back and give it a try. There's an error in here somewhere. Where is it? Over here. Unused variable v. So we have v, default, case HTTP handler. So I should use it down here. I'll just put it in here. I got to use that variable somewhere. So I'll change this to a format.sprintf. And inside of that, type is not, but is, and then I'll put in my syntax for that, which is simply %t. We haven't seen that yet, but that just says print the type. And that's what the placeholder for the type, same as %d is a placeholder for ints and %s is a placeholder for strings. This is for v. There. Now we have no error. So now I should be able to run this test. Let's try this. So I'll go back to my terminal window, clear the screen, and go test. And everything passed. Good. So now I've tested that handler. No problem. What else do I have to test in middleware? Well, I have session load. And what does that do? That receives an HTTP handler and it hands back an HTTP handler. So let's just make sure that'll run. That's pretty easy to do. It's pretty much the same thing. I can just copy this and paste it and change it to test session load. And in this case, I'm going to create a handler. But instead of creating a nosurf, I'm going to call session load. And session load should give back a type. And the type should be what? It should be an HTTP handler. Nothing else should change. So let's try this. Go run test, or go test -v. Everything passed. Okay, so now I've tested my main function as much as I want to. I've tested my middleware function as much as I want to. Now roots. How do I test my roots? I have all these roots. I'd really like to test those. Well, it's not that difficult. Again, okay, let's go back to our web folder, and create a new file called roots_test.go. So it creates that file for me. And in here, it's a package name. I need to write some test roots. So let's write a function, func test roots, and it takes testing.t, and it doesn't return anything. So what do I need to run the roots? Well, let's go back here and look at them. I need an app config, a pointer to an app config. I definitely need that, and it has to return a handler. Okay, so what else do I need in here? Let's just try it out and see what happens. So roots test. First of all, I can say var app, which is a config, app config. No problem. I've created a variable. It doesn't have to have anything in it. And then I can call mux. I'll just call that my variable name because that's what we're using in the roots file. And call roots and pass it a pointer to my app. Okay. And then switch v mux.type. I'm going to just test the type again and run this and say, is it of type? Well, what actual type does this return? Let's go back to our roots and see what it's returning. It's returning mux. And mux is a pointer to chi.mux. Okay, so that's what I should test for. So case star chi.mux, and it does the import for me. Do nothing. Test passed. And let's try our default case. If it's not that, then I want to add an error. T error. And again, I'll do format sprintf. Type is not chi.mux. Type is %t. And in there, I'll just put v. So let's see if this works. Let's try running this test. Clear the screen, go test -v. Everything passed. That's not bad at all. So if we tested everything we need to test in here, let's find out. Under our web folder, we have main.go. We're testing our run function, and we're testing that right here. Good. Under our middleware test, we're testing test no surf and test session load. And in middleware, we have no surf and session load. In roots test, we're only testing the roots file, creating the roots app, or calling the roots function. So under roots, we have roots. That seems good so far. That seems to work just perfectly. So let's see now what our coverage looks like. Test, or go test cover. 80.9% of statements. That's pretty good. Well, what about testing in a little more detail? How do we test to get our coverage as an HTML file? Well, if you recall, we do it like this. We go and test, and then cover profile equals coverage.out, or whatever we want to call it. And then we run go tool cover HTML format using coverage.out. Let's see how that works. Fires up my web browser and it says, okay, you're not testing your main function. We knew that. This is all tested except for that. I can live with that because we know that the test failed at that point. Okay. And we look at our middleware. That's entirely covered, everything that has to be. And we look at our roots. And that's entirely covered. That's pretty good. I think that's excellent test coverage for our main package. So we've tested our main and we've tested our handlers. Let's move on with some other tests. We haven't actually tested our handlers. We've tested our routes. Let's move on with our handlers in the next section.